All right, so let's dive right in here with some pretty big news that I'm sure a lot of you are or at least aware of. Um, Kash Patel, a guy known for his well, let's just say very close ties with Donald Trump, has just been confirmed as FBI director.
Huge news. Yeah.
And I'm sure some of you might be thinking, okay, so what does that have to do with me?
Right. Like, how does this actually impact, everyday folks out there?
Yeah, exactly. But see, this isn't just some random guy getting a promotion, you
Mhm.
know. This is Kash Patel we're talking about.
Definitely not your average appointment.
I mean, think back to some of the things he said. Calling those officials who were looking into Trump criminal gangsters. Pretty strong words, right?
Hmm.
And then remember his comments about the January 6th rioters? Say they were political prisoners?
Yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows at the time.
Oh, and don't forget about that time he suggested they should turn FBI headquarters into like a deep state museum.
Hard to forget that one.
So yeah. Now this is the guy running the whole show over at the FBI.
And it was a close one, too, the Senate vote. I mean, it was 51 to 49.
Well, really? That close?
Yeah, some Republicans actually voted against him, too, not just Democrats.
Hmm. Interesting. So it wasn't just a smooth ride to confirmation, huh?
Not at all. Democrats really tried to slow things down, even held a protest outside of FBI headquarters.
Really? Wow, they were serious about
Oh,
this.
yeah. One senator even said, and this is a direct quote, "This vote will haunt anyone who votes for him. They will rue the day they did it." So, yeah, pretty strong feelings about this appointment.
Rue the day. Wow, that's dramatic.
Yeah, no kidding. And it makes you wonder, what are they so worried about?
Yeah, what's the big deal here?
Well, a lot of the concerns boil down to a few key things.
Okay, like what?
Well, first off, Patel's experience, or I guess you could say lack of experience when it comes to running a huge organization like the FBI.
Yeah, that makes sense. You
Yeah.
need someone who knows what they're doing.
Exactly. I mean, compared to past FBI directors, Patel just doesn't have that same level of management experience.
So it's not just about his political views, but also about his ability to actually run the place.
Well, exactly. It's a massive organization with a ton of responsibility. You need someone who can handle that.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't like running a small-town police department.
All right, this is the FBI. We're talking national security, counterterrorism, cybercrime. The stakes are incredibly high.
So experience is definitely a big factor here. What else?
Well, then there's the whole issue of political bias.
Right. I mean, given his history with Trump and those past statements, it's hard not to wonder if he can be impartial.
Yeah, that's a major concern for a lot of people. They worry he might prioritize, personal loyalties or political agendas over, actually upholding the law.
And that's a scary thought.
It is, because if the FBI isn't seen as impartial, if people think it's being used for political purposes, well, that undermines the whole system.
Yeah, people need to trust that the FBI is acting fairly regardless of their political beliefs.
Exactly. Otherwise, you lose public trust, and that can have serious consequences.
People might be less likely to cooperate with investigations or report crimes if they think the FBI has a hidden agenda.
Right. It could impact everything from how investigations are conducted to which crimes are prioritized.
So, yeah, impartiality is absolutely crucial.
It's the foundation of a fair and just system, and it's what people expect from the FBI.
And then there's the whole thing about those firings at the FBI. I mean, even before he was officially confirmed, there were accusations that Patel was behind some kind of purge.
Yeah, that definitely added fuel to the fire.
So what happened there?
Well, the Justice Department, they asked for the names of agents who were involved in the January 6th investigations.
And that's unusual.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
typical. And then shortly after that, there were reports of potential firings within the FBI.
So people are connecting those two things.
A lot of critics see it as a way to get rid of anyone who might be seen as disloyal to Trump.
And they were pointing the finger at Patel.
Yep, they see him as the driving force behind it all.
Wow, so even before officially starting the job, he's already stirring up controversy.
It definitely creates this cloud of suspicion right from the start.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of drama brewing over at the FBI.
And Patel's right in the middle of it.
So we've got these concerns about experience, we've got worries about political bias, and now we've got this whole firing scandal. It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It's certainly a situation that deserves close attention. But, it's important to understand both sides of the story.
Okay, so what's the other side? Why are Republicans so supportive of Patel? What's their argument here?
Well, they believe that Patel will bring a much-needed change to the FBI.
Like what kind of change?
Well, they want to see the FBI focus more on what they call traditional crime fighting.
Traditional crime fighting. What does that mean?
Basically, they feel the FBI has become too focused on intelligence gathering and counterterrorism in recent years.
Okay, so let's focus on global threats and more on what's happening here at home.
Exactly. They want to see a return to prioritizing crimes that directly impact local communities. Things like drug trafficking, violent crime, things like that.
Hmm, yeah, I can see how that would appeal to some people. Everyone wants to feel safe in their community.
Right, and they feel like the FBI has lost sight of that.
Okay, so less global, more local, but is that really the best approach? I mean, what about the threat of terrorism? Shouldn't that be a priority?
That's the debate, isn't it? It's a balancing act. Patel and his supporters, they believe the FBI has become too focused on preventing another 9/11 at the expense of addressing everyday crime.
Okay, so they see it as a trade-off.
Exactly. They argue that this approach has actually alienated local communities and created this atmosphere of distrust.
Interesting. So Patel's vision is to bring the FBI back to its roots, focusing on the crimes that people see and feel in their daily lives.
That's the idea.
But can he really do that while also addressing those concerns about political bias?
Right.
Can he really separate his personal loyalties from his duty to uphold the law?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, and that's what we'll be getting into next.
Stay tuned, folks, because things are about to get even more interesting. So we've talked about, Patel's background and all the controversy around his appointment, but let's try to move beyond the politics for a minute and really think about what this all means for, the average person.
Yeah, let's get practical here.
Mm.
How does this actually affect people's lives?
Well, Republicans, they believe that this shift towards traditional crime fighting is going to make communities safer.
Okay, but how so?
Well, their argument is that by redirecting resources, the resources that are currently being used for things like counterterrorism,
Uh-huh.
they could be used to tackle issues that people are dealing with every day, like drug trafficking, gang violence, cybercrime.
Okay, so more focus on the stuff that's happening in our own backyards.
Exactly. The stuff that people actually see and feel in their communities.
I can see how that would be appealing.
Mm,
I mean, everyone wants to feel safe where they live.
right. And they feel like the FBI has kind of lost sight of that.
But wouldn't shifting resources away from counterterrorism make us more vulnerable to attacks? I mean, isn't that a risk?
Well, yeah, that's the trade-off, isn't it?
Right.
It's a balancing act. Patel and his supporters, they believe that the FBI has become too focused on preventing another 9/11,
Mm.
and that in doing so, they've kind of neglected these other issues that are plaguing communities.
So they see it as like a pendulum that swung too far in one direction.
Exactly, and they want to bring it back towards the center.
Okay. But even if they're right, even if we need to rebalance things, can we really trust Patel to do that fairly? I mean, given his history and those concerns about political bias.
That's the big question mark, isn't it? Can he really separate his personal loyalties from his duty to uphold the law?
Because if he uses the FBI to target certain groups or individuals based on their political beliefs, well, that's a terrifying thought.
It is, and it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. I mean, we've seen throughout history how law enforcement agencies can be used as tools for political repression. And if that happens here, if the FBI becomes weaponized for political gain, well, that would be devastating, not just for public trust, but for the very foundation of our democracy.
Yeah, it would completely erode faith in the system.
Exactly. And it would make us all less safe. Because if people don't trust the FBI, they're less likely to cooperate with investigations or report crimes.
Creates this vicious cycle of suspicion and fear.
Right. And that makes it even harder for law enforcement to do their job effectively.
So it's not just about ideology, it's about the practical consequences of those actions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this potential shift in priorities towards more local crime fighting, but with this huge question mark hanging over it about political bias.
Yeah.
What else is Patel planning to do?
Well, he's talked a lot about transparency, particularly with Congress.
Okay, so more open communication, more accountability.
That's the idea. But, the devil's in the details.
Right, because it all depends on whether Congress actually holds him accountable.
Exactly. And given the current political climate, well, it's hard to say how effective that oversight will be.
Yeah, I mean, these are the same people who just confirmed him despite all the red flags.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
So how should we, the average citizens, be thinking about all this? It feels like a lot of big abstract ideas, but with potentially huge consequences.
It is complex, but I think the bottom line is this Patel's leadership represents a fundamental shift for the FBI, and it has a potential to reshape the agency for years to come. It's not just political maneuvering. This is something that could have a very real impact on our lives.
So we need to pay attention.
We need to stay informed. We need to engage in these conversations, and we need to hold our leaders accountable.
Don't just tune it out as political noise.
This is about the kind of society we want to live in. A society where justice is served fairly and impartially, or one where fear and suspicion become the norm.
And that brings us back to that central question. Can Patel, a man known for his loyalty, truly lead an institution that demands impartiality?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
So stay with us, folks. Things are about to get even more interesting. So we've talked about Patel, his background, his plans for the FBI, and all the anxieties around this appointment. But let's take a step back here for a second and look at the bigger picture. What does this all mean for the FBI, as an institution?
Yeah, that's really the core issue here, isn't it? The FBI has always had this unique place in American society. It's seen as like the gold standard of law enforcement, an agency that's supposed to operate, above the political fray. But with Patel's confirmation, the way it happened with that razor-thin vote, it's really kind of damaged that image.
Yeah, it's tough to maintain that whole impartial thing when the guy at the top is seen as, a political loyalist.
Exactly. And it raises this question, can the FBI actually regain that public trust? Can they convince people that they're still committed to justice, to, following the facts wherever they lead, regardless of the political pressure?
Because if they can't, that impacts all of us, right? I mean, the FBI depends on the public cooperating to solve crimes, prevent terrorism, keep communities safe.
Absolutely. If people believe the FBI is operating with some kind of political agenda, they're going to be less likely to report crimes or provide tips or even trust the information they're given.
Right. It just creates this atmosphere of suspicion and fear.
Exactly. And that makes it harder for them to do their job.
And in a way, that fear, that lack of trust can be more dangerous than any specific crime.
You're right. It erodes that social fabric, It makes people question their neighbors, their institutions, even their own government.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Distrust just breeds more distrust.
Right, and that makes it harder for law enforcement to actually do what they need to do.
Exactly. And ultimately, that makes us all less safe.
So a lot hinges on Patel's actions now. Can he actually walk that tightrope, between his loyalty to Trump and his duty to be impartial? Can he restore that reputation that the FBI has had as, a trustworthy institution?
It's a tall order, that's for sure. He's going to have to make some pretty bold moves to prove that he's committed to transparency and impartiality. He needs to build bridges with communities that feel marginalized and alienated, and he needs to convince the American people that the FBI is working for them, not for a political party or an ideology.
It's a huge moment for the FBI and for the country. What happens next is going to determine whether the FBI can stay a symbol of justice and integrity, or if it just becomes, another political tool.
And for our listeners, this is a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting these institutions. We need to stay informed, engage in these conversations, and hold our leaders accountable.
This has been quite a deep dive. I have to say it's left me with more questions than answers.
Yeah, but that's how it is with these complex issues, isn't it? Sometimes just asking the right questions is more important than having all the answers.
That's a good point. Well, thanks for walking us through all of this.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, stay curious, stay engaged, and as always, keep asking those tough questions.